It is 3 a.m. in New York, 10 in Kiev, and 4 on a Monday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Moon Gun-young. You're watching ARIRANG Korea's only global network. For as much attention as has been given to the acts of the Sewol-ho ferry captain and crew who abandoned the vessel with hundreds still on board, there are countless other stories of heroes who put others' lives before theirs. And the Korean government on this Monday officially recognized 3 of them as martyrs. Now, 22-year-old Park Ji-young, a part-time worker on the ferry, will be remembered for staying on board to hand out life vests, even foregoing one herself. Ki-woong and Jung Hyun-seon, an engaged couple, could have been rescued from the severely listing ferry, but decided instead to go back inside to help others escape. All 3 died. Being designated as a martyr by the government means they can be buried at a national cemetery. It also makes their bereaved families eligible for financial compensation, medical assistance, and other incentives. In addition to these 3 heroes, the government is reviewing a list of others who were on board the Sewol-ho for the martyr designation. Now, let's go over to the investigation front on the Sewol-ho ferry disaster. Nearly 1 month has passed since the ferry capsized, but investigators finally believe they are edging closer to finding out who was the real owner of the sunken vessel. But they're finding it hard work as figures with close ties to the ferry's operator are refusing to cooperate with the investigation. Our Connie Kim gives us the latest update.
Investigators believe they are narrowing in on the real owner of the sunken Sewol-ho ferry, which they believe is the key to unlocking what may have caused the accident. Key figures associated with Cheonghaejin Marine Company, the practical owner of the ferry, have not been cooperating with the investigation. Prosecutors summoned in Yoo Dae-gyun, the first son of Cheonghaejin owner Yoo Byung-an, for questioning Monday morning, but he failed to appear. If he had shown up, they would have asked him about his involvement in Sewol Group, under which Cheonghaejin operates. The prosecution is currently reviewing to issue an arrest warrant for Yoo to force him in. Yoo currently holds majority shares in 3 Sewol Group affiliates. He was paid nearly $10,000 a month for his duties, and the prosecution suspects he is deeply involved with the day-to-day operations. Investigators are also looking at him on charges of tax evasion. Prosecutors did have a chance to talk with another member of the Yoo family on Sunday. Yoo Byung-il, the older brother of Cheonghaejin owner Yoo Byung-an, was questioned overnight on his possible involvement in the construction of the Sewol-ho ferry and the business operations of Cheonghaejin Marine Company. Yoo Byung-an is likely to be summoned sometime this week. While investigators hone in on the ferry operator and owner, the search for those still missing in the accident continues off Jindo Island in southwestern Korea. Fast tidal currents have halted operations since early Saturday morning. Now, when divers are able to re-enter the water, they'll attempt to gain better access into the 4th level of the ship, where more bodies are expected to be found. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
President Park Geun-hye held a rare emergency meeting with her senior secretaries over the weekend and decided to make an official apology to the nation in the form of a public address for the devastating Sewol-ho ferry disaster sometime in the near future. Now, the address will also include measures to completely reform the nation's crisis management system. Our correspondent Choi Yoo-sun has more.
When President Park Geun-hye addresses the nation in the coming days, she's expected to apologize to the Korean people for the government's failure to prevent the Sewol-ho ferry tragedy. She has apologized a number of times since the accident nearly a month ago, but has been criticized for not making one directly to the public. In her speech, President Park will also lay out the details of a new master plan to bolster national safety and a new ministry she's previously pledged to establish to oversee emergency response and management.
재난 안전의 컨트롤 타워에 대해서는 전담 부처를 설치해서 사회 재난과 자연 재해 관리를 일원화해 효율적이고 강력한 통합 재난 대응 체계를 구축하는 것이 바람직하다는 결론에 이르렀습니다.
At a surprise meeting with her senior secretaries on Sunday, the president also discussed ways to bring about sweeping reforms to public service and root out irregularities that are blamed for having caused a deadly ferry accident. It's a sentiment President Bak first iterated 2 weeks after the Sewol-ho ferry sank.
이번에는 반드시 과거로부터 이어져온 잘못된 문제들을 바로잡고 새로운 대한민국의 틀을 다시 잡아서 국민들의 신뢰를 되찾고 안심하고 살 수 있는 대한민국을 만드는 길에 나설 것입니다.
There's also speculation about reshuffles within the cabinet and the presidential office, especially as a number of officials have been slammed publicly for inconsiderate behavior since the Sewol-ho accident. The president's address will likely come either Tuesday, when a cabinet meeting is scheduled, or towards the end of the week, when the prosecution and police are expected to announce an interim report on their joint ferry disaster probe. Choi Yu-sun, ARIRANG News.
Meanwhile, the ruling Saenuri Party has started casting ballots in a primary that will select its candidate for next month's Seoul mayoral race. In less than 2 hours' time, we'll know who won. The party has 3 political heavyweights to choose from: former Prime Minister Ki-woong, 7-term lawmaker Jung Hyun-seon, and Supreme Council member Lee Hae-hoon. The winner will square up against incumbent Seoul Mayor Park Won-soon of the main opposition, New Politics Alliance for Democracy, on June 4th. Once the ruling party's mayoral contender is selected, the Saenuri Party will have finalized its list of candidates for all 17 metropolitan and provincial posts. Separatists in eastern Ukraine pushed forward with their Sunday vote, and now we are hearing they have declared victory. The preliminary vote count was announced just 2 hours after the polls closed in that referendum for self-rule, and no big surprise here. Pro-Moscow separatists say residents overwhelmingly supported their cause. Our Kwon So-ha has the latest.
It was the outcome everyone expected, but it's one that will face resistance from many inside and outside of Ukraine. The referendum vote on self-rule in 2 of the tensest regions in eastern Ukraine closed Sunday night local time. Separatists claim that preliminary results show nearly 90% are in favor of self-governance in the region of Donetsk. Voter turnout there was around 75%. Early counts in Luhansk show about 80% in favor of self-rule.
When I saw that the interim government had taken such illegal actions toward us, I decided to vote for myself.
People in Kiev, however, are furious and are calling for national unity.
This is not a referendum, but a lie. It's absolute Russia's provocation. Russia just wants to copy the script of Crimea's independence and separate Donetsk and Luhansk from Ukraine.
At least 1 person was shot dead west of Donetsk city as armed men supporting the Kiev government tried to stop the vote. The final results will be announced on Monday. The legitimacy of the vote has been called into question, not only because it was held among a minority of the Ukrainian population, but also because people were seen voting more than once, while some areas didn't even have voting booths in place. The US and the European Union say they won't accept the outcome, condemning the vote as illegal. The interim government in Kiev has called the ballot self-destructive and says the focus should be on the nationwide election set for May 25th. Western leaders agreed that if that vote does not take place, there will be consequences, including stronger sanctions against Russia. Kwon So-ha, ARIRANG News.
Samsung Electronics chairman Lee Gun-hee is stable and recovering at a private hospital in southern Seoul after suffering a heart attack. Now, Lee's health complications have Samsung Group on high alert, and many are closely watching the chairman's health conditions. Our Kim Min-ji reports.
The failing health of Lee Gun-hee, the chairman of Samsung Electronics, has yet again emerged as a massive concern to the management of the sprawling Samsung Group. He underwent an emergency medical procedure at the Samsung Medical Center on Sunday after suffering cardiac arrest. Hospital officials say the 72-year-old is stable and showing signs of improvement.
The chairman showed symptoms of heart failure and underwent an emergency procedure which involved a stent placement. He's now in a stable condition and recovering.
Samsung's top executives, including officials from the group's corporate strategy office, visited the hospital and held meetings to discuss the next steps. Experts speculate Samsung will not take any immediate action, but they'll keep a close eye on the situation for the time being. In 2008, when he gave up his position as Samsung Group chairman after a special inquiry which found him guilty of tax evasion and breach of duty, the group implemented several management reforms, but did not enter an emergency business management mode. He returned to the front lines of management in March 2010. His ailing health, however, will likely have a substantial effect on the group's management as he makes key management decisions and initiates business reshuffles. The group recently underwent a major shakeup, transferring executives from the corporate strategy office to Samsung Electronics. The company is expected to take some special steps to carry out the so-called MAC management put forward by Lee. MAC management refers to making fundamental changes to the firm in order to maintain its position as a top global corporation. The chairman has a history of respiratory problems dating back to the late 1990s, when he had surgery for lung cancer. He was also hospitalized last summer with symptoms of light pneumonia. With Lee's health problems taking a turn for the worst, Samsung is also expected to accelerate its corporate succession to Lee's 3 children. Lee's only son, Samsung Electronics Vice Chairman Lee Jae-yong, will likely succeed him eventually. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
Korea's GDP per capita continues to rise slowly but surely, edging up one notch in rankings to 33rd in the world, which is as of last year. Now, according to an economic outlook by the International Monetary Fund, Korea's GDP per person stood at slightly over $24,300 in 2013, up $1,700 from a year earlier. Luxembourg topped the list at over $110,000, followed by Norway, Qatar, and Switzerland. Korea's nominal GDP remained in the top 15 in the world for the 5th consecutive year at $1.2 trillion last year. The U.S. still has the world's biggest economy at $16.8 trillion, followed by China at $9.2 trillion. Foreign currency deposits in Korean banks hit a new record high last month, resetting a high mark set just 2 months earlier. The Bank of Korea said Monday that outstanding foreign currency denominated deposits stood at $58.4 billion as of the end of April, up $7.3 billion from the previous month. Corporate deposits accounted for about 90% of the total. Dollar-dominated and yuan-dominated deposits both rose on month. Officials at the central bank expect the trend to continue over the coming months as exporters put their dollars into deposits. Now, the Korean government says it will invest tens of millions of dollars in one of the hottest and most talked about industries, which is the Internet of Things. Now, Internet of Things envisions connecting items we use in our everyday lives to the Internet in the name of convenience and interconnectivity. ARIRANG News Hyun-seon reports.
$36 million from the government and another $12 million from private sectors. The Korean government is gearing up to foster new growth engines in the domestic technology market. Microelectromechanical system, or MEMS sensor chips, are one of the core technologies in the Internet of Things market, which envisions connecting everyday items such as phones, fridges, and boilers to the Internet. The MEMS sensors embedded in our devices help analyze data by collecting and registering changes of information such as temperature, light, sound, and motion. However, most Korean companies currently import the chips because they don't have the technology to produce them yet. And that's why the government is planning to inject some $20 million by 2019 into developing and manufacturing more of these chips domestically. Korea hopes to produce more than $220 million worth of MEMS sensors by the year 2020. That's a threefold increase from what the country manufactured last year. Another $16 million will go into developing devices that transfer data collected from sensors to long-distance control centers. Korea is not able to produce such devices yet, but the government is rolling out ambitious plans to create a manufacturing volume worth more than $500 million by 2020. Some industry experts wonder aloud whether the government's targets are realistic, but others are hopeful that Korea will be at the forefront of conceptualizing the Internet of Things in real life by utilizing its state-of-the-art IT and mobile telecommunications technologies. 나현경, 아리랑 뉴스.
The Korean currency has recently been hovering around its highest level in nearly 6 years, but there is no sign that the won will lose its strength anytime soon. In fact, market watchers expect the local currency to test psychologically important levels in coming months. Here's our Hwang Ji-hye with this report.
Expectations are growing for a stronger Korean won that's already trading at the 1,020 level against the US dollar. Market watchers say that by the end of this year, the won is likely to breach the psychologically important 1,000 level. The Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi UFJ predicts the Korean won to trade at 975 against the dollar, while the American banking company Wells Fargo expects it to trade at 990. Analysts attribute the strength of the won to the widely shared perception that the Korean currency is undervalued. The IMF has recently said it believed the won is as much as 8% undervalued and that the country has an unusually large current account surplus, which accounted for some 6% of the nation's gross domestic product. It added that steps to lower the Korean currency's value would do more harm than good. The U.S. Treasury Department has also called on Korea last month to limit foreign exchange intervention to exceptional circumstances. Experts are concerned the won is gaining strength too fast. The local currency gained value by more than 3% against the greenback last month, the biggest upward shift among the world's 40 major currencies. They point out, however, the U.S. Federal Reserve's plan to end its stimulus programs could reverse the won's trend later this year. Hwang Ji-hye, 아리랑 뉴스.
Better than expected April exports in Korea, Taiwan, and China have economists talking about the long-awaited pickup in demand from the West. But for Korea, a rising local currency is making an already fragile export outlook look even shakier. Strengthening local currency, a recession-like trade surplus, less so impressive exports, and a possible impact from the nation's deadly ferry disaster. Let's try getting an overall assessment of the Korean economy today and seek possible measures to avoid a negative impact. For that, Dr. Kim In-cheol, professor of international economics at Sungkyunkwan University, joins me live in the studio. Professor Kim, welcome to the program.
My pleasure to be here.
Now, the local currency, the won, has climbed 2.4% this year to its highest level against the U.S. dollar now since August 2008. I think what's worse is that it has climbed 5.5% at the against the currency of Korea's biggest export market, which is China, of course, thanks to efforts by Beijing to push the yuan lower. Now, the rise in value of the local currency is usually good news for the Korean economy, but this time around, not so much. Could you explain to us why that is the case?
Okay. Under the globally flexible exchange rate system, the exchange rate between any two nations is changing every day. And in principle, the demand and supply in the foreign currency market determine the market exchange rate. Mm-hmm. And see, the thing is that the Korean won currency gets stronger when its exports increase, when its imports decrease, and when its net capital inflows expand and increase. Now, besides the secularly weakening trend of the U.S. dollar value, okay, has made most of the other currencies stronger. So the confluence of all these factors has made the Korean won currency, become stronger. Now, this time the exchange rate change, the $1 change, is somewhat worrisome because, say, less than a month ago, the exchange rate was, a little above the 1,070 level. But now it has come down to the 1,021 level. So this is too big a change, and this is too short a time. So it is the exchange rate volatility that makes people feel uneasy, because the volatility, exchange rate volatility, is becoming more unpredictable.
Right, and currency fluctuations, of course, have a big impact on the nation's exporters. And of course, Korea being a heavily export-driven economy, that cannot be good news for the nation's economy. Now, what are some preemptive measures that the government or whatnot, the industries can come up with to better protect the nation's exporters from these currency fluctuations?
Well, I'm afraid there's very little we can do, but nevertheless, there is one straightforward preemptive measure to protect the exporters and the importers from exchange rate risk. That is, they can use the currency or the exchange rate volatility insurance facility that is conducted by the Korea Trade Insurance Corporation. And by paying a small fee of insurance premium, they can protect themselves from the exchange rate risk. Those exporters who sell the ships, large ships, vessels, and cars can sell their dollars in the forward market, whereas the importers can buy their dollars in the foreign market as well. So by utilizing these facility, they can avoid somewhat the exchange rate risk. Now, one other perhaps indirect the measure to protect themselves from exchange rate risk is to extend their knowledge of the operation of the forward exchange market, how they operate, and what is the nature of the current exchange rate, spot exchange market and the forward exchange market, even the currency futures market. And they need to study, and also they need to improve their skill and ability to predict the future exchange rate. So that's that they can do. I think that's the ways of, there are ways to get around the problem at this point.
Right. Meanwhile, the Korea Central Bank left its key interest rate unchanged for the 12th straight month, and in May. And this, of course, as it seeks to spur growth, in the face of headwinds from a surge in the won, as well as possible impact from weaker consumption, of course, from the ferry accident. But I'm sure it's inevitable that the Bank of Korea needs to raise or conduct a rate hike at some point. How much longer do we expect the BOK to keep the rate at this level?
I think at the present time, the Bank of Korea is in a policy dilemma. Because it may have to raise its interest rate, the benchmark rate, as the U.S. Federal Reserve's, increasing its federal funds rate. Otherwise, a massive, capital outflows will take place, and at the same time, when the interest rate increases, the interest rate burden of the household debtors will increase, and then their consumption will fall. Now, if they lower the interest rate, then the burden or the purchasing power of the senior citizens who mainly rely on their savings deposits, they complain and their consumption will fall. So either way, it is a kind of dilemma situation. Nevertheless, there will be a very small room for the central bank to implement its monetary and interest rate policy. That is, they can, they may lower the interest rate, the base rate, a little bit at the right time, and then, may jack it up later again at the right time. So the decision-making on the timing and the magnitude of the change are extremely important.
Right. That's, of course, that needs to come from the economic policymakers of this country. Now, the Korean government, meanwhile, unveiled a set of measures aimed at boosting domestic consumption by speeding up spending in the wake of the Sewol-ho ferry accident. Now, there are, however, skeptics about this set of measures, saying that this will not do much to spur the economy. Your take on that?
Well, I will say that because the government, the Ministry of Finance and Strategy, has announced that they may, increase or implement its spending earlier a bit earlier than the scheduled, and it may even increase the scale of its expenditure. So definitely will have some impact on the macroeconomy, the positive impact. There's no question about that. But at the same time, I think the government should focus on the stimulation of consumer spending. Now, for that to be done, the people in general need to change their consumer sentiment. The psychology, they need to be changed. And then the economy will pick up sometime later in this quarter, second quarter.
Right. I mean, we as a nation should mourn together and remember those who perished in the Sewol-ho ferry accident. But at the same time, we need to get back to our everyday lives as well. So that needs to be done. All right, Dr. Kim In-chul, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you for being with me.
And that is your business today on this Monday. Thank you for watching. Do join us again 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Dish Net 6.